I can still recall the moment when my faith in the Emperor began to unravel. It didn't vanish in a single instant. Belief rarely does. Instead, it wore away piece by piece, like cliffs battered endlessly by waves until one day the stone gives way beneath your feet. My name is Jorvan Krail. Once, I bore the title of Commissar with the 117th Cadian Regiment. But titles and honors mean nothing here. Out in this place, civilization is just a memory. The first assault on the senses was the stench. A foul mix of blood, filth, and sweat hung so thick in the air it felt like drowning. The smell never left you. It crept into your skin, your lungs, your mind. In time, the brain adjusts, but that is both humanity's gift and its curse. We can endure almost anything, even what should never be endured. I woke not in darkness, but in a sickly green glow cast by crude fungal lamps. My head throbbed where a blow had left blood crusted across my scalp. The raid had gone wrong. It was supposed to be routine, a strike on a lone orc outpost. Instead, we walked into a trap. Whether through failed intelligence or betrayal, I still cannot say. The floor beneath me was rusted metal grating, slick with filth I didn't care to name. Overhead, a roof of scrap metal rattled with dripping condensation. Around me came faint moans. Others were here too, unseen but suffering. I could sense the chamber stretched far, filled with row after row of cages. Then a whisper. Commissar? Commissar Krail. I turned my aching neck toward the sound. Out of the dim light, a battered face emerged. Trooper Varun, one of our scouts. His left eye was swollen shut, his skin streaked with dried blood like rusted tears. Report, Trooper. I rasped, the habit of command still clinging to me. A bitter laugh escaped him. Report? There's nothing left to report, sir. The mission's finished. The platoon is gone. We're prisoners now. I pressed him for numbers. He guessed maybe 20 survived the ambush. The rest had been slaughtered or executed for sport. Officers were singled out as entertainment. My life had been spared only because I'd been knocked unconscious. They preferred their victims awake. The word entertainment hung over me like a curse, though at the time I didn't fully understand. That lesson would come later, and it would shatter what remained of my faith. A heavy tread echoed through the chamber, metal clanging with each step. Varun and I shrank into the corners of our cages as the sound grew closer. A guttural laugh rolled through the gloom. New meat awake. A massive green face pressed close to my cage, its small red eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. Not the largest orc I had seen, but still towering, scarred, and muscled like iron. He sneered at me. You got the fancy hat. Boss says you special. You last longer. Maybe. I said nothing, clinging to the last shreds of dignity. There's no doctrine in the Commissar's handbook for what to do when captured alive by Xenos. The official stance is to die fighting. Yet here I was, alive, helpless, and caged. The orc's grin widened, showing jagged metal teeth. Silent, don't worry. All humies scream in the end. Screaming's good. He laughed, a sound like boulders grinding in a drum, before adding, food soon. You fight good, you eat good. You fight bad, you still eat, but maybe lose some bits first. With that, he moved along the cages, poking prisoners with a crude sparking rod. Each crackle of energy was followed by screams that tore through the darkness. A grim chorus that promised what awaited us. What did he mean, fight for food? I asked Varun once the orc had lumbered out of earshot. You'll see soon enough, Commissar, he replied, voice flat with resignation. They don't just feed us. That would be too simple, too civilized. With orcs, everything becomes a spectacle. Suffering is sport. Before I could press him further, a deafening klaxon blared, the sound rattling through the chamber until my skull ached with the vibration. The reaction from the prisoners was immediate and unsettling. Some curled into themselves, rocking as if the noise alone could break them. Others stood rigid, eyes wide, caught somewhere between terror and anticipation. Varun simply closed his eyes and muttered what I realized was a prayer. At the far end of the chamber, enormous gates ground open, flooding the space with light. Beyond them lay a circular pit, and around its edge clustered a mob of orcs, howling, jeering, waving crude weapons in the air. I later learned they were betting on us, our lives, our humiliation. Cages were unhooked one by one and lowered down into the arena. Each prisoner inside reacted differently. Some struggled desperately. Others sank into silence, accepting what was to come. When the cages hit the ground, they opened, spilling their occupants into the pit. At its center sat a mound of rancid meat, crawling with maggots, but recognizably food of a sort. The rules revealed themselves quickly. Fight for scraps. Fight one another. Fight to survive. I watched, horrified, as men I had once commanded, Imperial Guardsmen sworn to stand, shoulder to shoulder against mankind's foes, now clawed at each other like starving beasts. The orcs roared with approval, occasionally hurling debris into the pit to stoke the frenzy. The first time is hardest, Varun said quietly. That's when you still remember who you were. The second time, it's easier. By the third, you stop thinking altogether. You just become what they want you to be. How long have you been here? I asked, unable to look away from the spectacle. 10 feedings, maybe 11. Hard to keep count. Some have lasted longer. The ones who learn to please the greenskins. The ones who stop pretending they're still human. The orcs' cheers rose to a fever pitch as one scene unfolded. A burly guardsman had another in a chokehold, crushing the life from him while stretching for a scrap of meat. The victim's face turned purple, eyes bulging, as he clawed at the other's arms. That was Sergeant Halleck, Varun said tonelessly. He used to give his rations to the wounded. Look at him now. The struggling man went limp. Halleck released him and tore into the meat, maggots and all, while the crowd of orcs howled with laughter. Tomorrow it could be us, Varun continued. If not then, soon. They rotate the cages. Everyone gets their turn. I wanted to speak words of reassurance, to preach about the Emperor's light and the strength of the human spirit, as I had so many times before. But the words caught in my throat. What meaning could they possibly hold here? In this pit of rust and darkness where humanity was being gnawed away, piece by piece. Almost as if sensing my thoughts, Varun whispered, The Emperor cannot see us here, Commissar. This place lies outside his light. I should have silenced him, should have called his words heresy. Instead, I lay there in silence, watching men butcher one another for scraps while Xenos laughed. That night, stretched on the cold grating of my cage, surrounded by the moans of the wounded and the guttural barks of our captors, I found I could not pray. The words of the creed, etched into me since childhood, slipped away as if they had never been mine at all. A single question kept repeating in my head. What would I do when my cage was lowered into that pit? What would be left of Commissar Jorvin? Krail once hunger and the instinct to survive took over? Sleep had become a luxury of another life. Instead, I stayed half awake, alert to every scrape and cough, every footstep, living in a state of wary consciousness. The green fungal light never fully faded, bathing the chamber in a perpetual, sickly dusk. I mapped the cage around me like a man checking his armor. It was roughly 3 meters by 2, low enough that I had to stoop. The bars were scavenged metal, some pieces salvaged from Imperial wreckage, others of unknown manufacture, crudely welded together in true orc fashion. Not elegant, but solid. They had taken everything that mattered. My jacket, my bolt pistol, my power sword. Even the symbols, my commissar's cap and the red sash, were gone, stripped as trophies. I still wore my black trousers and boots, though the hidden blades had been removed. My identity tag, the Imperial Aquila pressed against my chest, hung like a cold keepsake from another world. Across from me, Varun had finally found sleep. Shallow breaths broken by the occasional whimper. An empty cage to my left suggested another man had already been fed to the pit. On my right, a figure sat hunched and quiet. When he turned, age and suffering showed in the web of scars, and a white beard matted with grime, but his eyes were startling, cold, clear blue that seemed to pierce the dimness. The Commissar wakens, he said, his voice stronger than his appearance warranted. Was wondering when you'd join our little community. You know who I am. I managed. Everyone knows the Commissar, he replied with a dry chuckle. The man who shoots the cowards. The symbol of imperial justice. Tell me, Commissar, where is your justice now? There was no answer I could give. He introduced himself as Thorn, once a medic with the 44th Valhallan, long before my time. He estimated he'd been here 3 months. 3 months. The number hit me like a physical weight. How have you lasted? I asked. By being useful, Thorn said simply. Orcs have a crude sense of medicine, amputations, cauterization. but sometimes they need something a little more delicate. To keep someone alive long enough for another feeding, for more entertainment. You help them torture our men? The disgust crept into my voice despite everything. Don't judge, Thorne said. Out here, we're all compromised. You will be too, if you stay. I don't help them hurt people. I patch them up afterward. I prolong their suffering, yes, but I also keep them alive longer. Sometimes long enough for mercy. Mercy, euthanasia whispered between the lines. Another crime against the creed that somehow felt like compassion in this place. There's another feeding tomorrow, Thorne said, shifting the conversation. Your cage is in the rotation. Be ready. What should I do? I swallowed my pride and asked for advice. In here, survival outranks rank, Thorne said, studying me. You're strong for an officer, and your training is an advantage. But strength isn't everything. The orcs don't only care who wins their games. They want entertainment. Sometimes a spectacular loss is worth more than a bloody victory. You mean I should throw the fight? I asked, incredulous. I mean you should learn the role that keeps you alive the longest, Thorne said. You are not a prisoner of war. You are a performer in a theater of cruelty. Learn the part that buys you time. Thorne's cryptic words hung with me as he turned away. A performer in a theater of cruelty. The notion was poison to everything I had been taught. Commissars did not perform. We commanded. We enforced. We were the iron will of the Emperor incarnate. Yet the Emperor was nowhere here. Only greenskins with a taste for spectacle and a hunger for humiliation. Slowly, the hard lines of my training began to blur. Survival demanded a flexibility my doctrine had never prepared me for. The orc guards returned like a funeral procession. They prodded prisoners awake with sparking rods, laughing when someone flinched or screamed. I sat rigid, every nerve taut, refusing to give them the satisfaction of fear. The guard who stopped at my cage was different from the brutish. One yesterday, larger, with a clanking mechanical eye that whirred as it scanned me. Commissar man, he grated, leaning close until the reek of his breath filled the bars. You fight today? Boss says make it a good show, or you end up as squig food. His metal eye, focused and a crude grin split his scarred face. I bet many teeth on you. You win, maybe extra food later. You lose. I cut off fingers one by one. The thought of mangled hands made my stomach roll. Thorne shifted beside me and, with a dry curl of a smile, muttered, an honor. Grim Tooth himself takes. Interest. Grim Tooth, a name meant to carry weight among orcs, was one of the boss's lieutenants. His favor could mean protection, or it could mean being paraded until you were nothing but entertainment. The klaxon screamed. The feeding ritual began. Around me, the prisoners moved with the same hollow blend of terror and resignation I had seen before. Varun was awake, face set like stone. Your turn, Commissar, he said quietly. Remember, they want a show. Give them what they want, and maybe you live. Sacrifice my dignity. The word tasted bitter. Dignity. Varun shrugged. Look around. There is none here. Only survival. Then the cage lurched. The fall was sudden. My stomach lifted as we dropped toward the pit. The air below was a wall of sound, cheers and jeers, and the metallic clang of orc revelry. A new layer of stench rolled up, sweat, fungus, and hot oil, acrid and clinging. When the cage hit the pit floor, it jarred me hard. Across from me, 3 other cages landed with similar thuds. I knew one of the men who emerged, Corporal Deshin, a heavy weapons specialist from 3rd Platoon. The others were strangers. Their uniforms, like ours, were ripped and caked with filth. A hulking orc pushed forward to the pit's edge, skin a map of scars and crude tattoos, a necklace of severed human fingers clanking against his chest. His tusked mouth split wide in a leering grin. Today's special, he roared, voice carrying over the crowd. We got Commissar Man. He shoots his own boys. Let's see if he good at fight or just good at killing scared. Ummies. The crowd answered with a tide of noise that set my teeth on edge. A wave of hate rose in me, so fierce it nearly drowned the fear. I promised, then and there, that if I survived I would find this orc's heart and tear it out. For a heartbeat no one moved. We studied one another, measuring the pit, the distance to the food, the angles of attack. In the center lay the same cruel prize, a slimy pile of meat and a few dented containers that might, if fortune allowed, hold water. The orc leader snapped his hand in a savage gesture that needed no language. Fight or no food. Maybe no fingers too, he snarled, and made a slashing motion across his palm. Corporal Shin lunged first, surprising speed in a man wasted by hunger. One of the strangers broke into a run after him. The third man pressed his back to the pit wall, eyes wide, palms spread as if to plead his neutrality. He looked like someone who had decided, too late, that not everything was survivable by hiding. The crowd roared its approval. The game had begun. I stepped carefully from the cage, taking everything in. The pit measured roughly 15 meters across. Its floor was packed earth stained dark with old blood. The walls rose about 5 meters, crowded with orcs leaning over the edge, the height enough to keep us trapped and give them a perfect view. Scattered across the arena were crude implements of violence, a length of chain, a splintered plank, a jagged scrap of metal. Not proper weapons, but things that would do the job. Entertainment props. Shin had already reached the food and was grappling with the other prisoner who'd sprinted for it. They twisted and shoved, each trying to claim a scrap while denying the other. The orcs above howled and hurled insults. Their delight fed the frenzy below. The third prisoner, the one edging toward the metal shard, moved with a cold calculation. I watched him, reading his stance, his intent. He had the makings of the real threat. The truth landed on me like a blow. These men were no longer my comrades. To eat, I would have to fight. To survive, perhaps to kill the men I would once have led into battle and died beside. The crowd's roar turned toward me. The orc leader jabbed a crude finger and shouted something lost in the noise, but clear in meaning. Do something, or something will be done to you. I moved toward the struggling pair, not yet committed but knowing I had to act. Shin managed a savage elbow to his rival's temple, sending the man sprawling. The corporal turned, meat clenched in his fist, eyes wary and bloodshot. Stay back, Commissar, he rasped. I respect your rank, but I'll fight for this. Perhaps we can share, I offered, keeping my hands open, trying to buy space we no longer deserved. Keep some semblance of unit. He barked a bitter laugh. Unit? Look around, sir. There's only hunger. I nodded toward the orcs. And entertainment. They want us to tear each other apart. Every moment we cooperate denies them that. For a second, the military logic in him flickered. I almost believed we might salvage something, until the metal shard flashed in a hand behind Shin. The strategic man I'd watched circled while we spoke. He drove the scrap into Shin's back and twisted. Blood sprayed the earth as Shin crumpled, the meat tumbling free from his slack fingers. The orcs exploded into cheers. The true spectacle had begun. Training took over. As the attacker lunged for me, I stepped aside, used his momentum to throw him past, and hammered the back of his knee with a practice strike. He folded. The shard clattered away, and I booted it out of reach, then drove a knee into his back to pin him. Yield, I commanded. The voice was reflex, conditioned from years of authority. He laughed. Broken animal. Yield? This ain't a dueling ground, Commissar. This is a death pit. There is no yielding. His words felt like another punch. This was no regulated fight with codes and honor. This was pure survival. No rules, no mercy. And in that awful clarity, something shifted inside me. I stepped out of the cage and stood my ground, letting the pit reveal itself to me, roughly 15 meters across. Its packed dirt stained dark with old blood, walls rising 5 meters to where the orcs leaned over for a perfect view. Scattered across the floor were crude props, chain, a splintered plank, a jagged scrap of metal, objects meant to become instruments of savagery. Shin had collapsed where he fell, motionless. One prisoner clutched a broken arm in the corner. Another, the cold-eyed opportunist, had slipped toward the metal shard. The crater's noise shifted toward me, erecting me as the new focal point. The orc leader jabbed and shouted. The meaning was unambiguous. Do something or be done to. I walked slowly around the fallen man and then stopped. He looked up, waiting for the finishing blow. The orcs above went strangely silent, puzzled by my hesitation. I raised my voice so the nearest faces could hear. I am Commissar Jorvenkrail of the Imperial Guard, I announced. I am not your plaything. A beat of silence, then a ripple of mocking laughter. Garbage and small rocks rained down. Worse, bits of severed fingers clattered among the dirt. The message was clear. Fight or be butchered. The man I'd spared scrambled to his feet, wary. Shin lay still. The wounded prisoner in the corner kept his distance. I planted my feet and refused to give the crowd the spectacle they wanted. It felt small, perhaps pointless, but a sliver of myself demanded it. A duty, a dignity, however fragile here. The big orc bellowed, then cut his throat with a hand gesture. Two smaller orcs detached from the crowd and vaulted down into the pit. Blades glinting, they spread and advanced like predators. My options were thin. Two armed orcs against one man left little margin for hope. Still, I would not die cowering. I dropped into a defensive stance and invited them on. They charged, surprisingly quick for such bulk. I dodged the first, used his momentum against him. But the second clipped my ribs. Pain flared, shallow but real. I backed toward the wall, searching for a way out. There was none. Then something unexpected, the metal shard that had felled. Dishin flew true and lodged in the eye of the nearest orc. It bellowed and dropped its blade. The other orc whirled, only to be struck across the face by a length of chain, wielded by the man in the corner. His arm wasn't as broken as he'd made it seem. "Commissar," the man called without taking his eyes off the enemy. "I suggest a strategic withdrawal." I grabbed the fallen orc's blade and nodded. He cracked his voice loud enough for the stands to hear and taunted their champions. "Is this the best you can offer? 2 runts against Imperial soldiers. Where's the sport in that?" It was a gamble, appeal to the orcs. Appetite for a challenge rather than mindless cruelty. It worked. The crowd's mood flickered. Some jeered at their own, disgusted by the uneven match.